Here is your motor system, and we're going to go through how to hook it up, the necessary procedure for that, and then show you the operation here. So we'll start off with the components. We have the cooling unit, which is the bulkhead mounted cooling unit. Here you have labeled coolant in, cool it out, salt water in and out, and then the connector. We have our distribution unit. So you guys are getting the updated version compared to what you saw on the website. This is bulkhead mounted. You don't need to take this cover off. And each one of these legs is labeled for the necessary components. So over here we have alarm. The system has a built-in alarm, but if you wanted extras, you could. Down here is the key, motor, display, programming, which you don't have to have connected all the time, but if and when I send you updated display files, you plug it up to here and you have a USB or the dongle, and then I'll ship you that if we have any major programming. Then we have the throttle and the cooling. Then we have 12 volt. So you'll have a separate switch for 12 volt power, and then you'll have key constant 12 volt. And then lastly, we have battery can. So battery can will communicate with your batteries so you can see all the important data for that. So that's the system in a nutshell as far as distribution goes. Then this is your motor. First of all, if you're looking at the gearbox on this starboard side, you'll remove this top cover with these acorn nuts. So you'll remove this cover, and here you'll install your battery negative. You'll want to make sure that your 16 gauge ground isn't acting as a washer. It should be below the washers, but this is where your negative goes. Then your positive will go to the contactor, which is underneath the motor, underneath the cooling plate, I'm sorry. Once you have your 48 volt cables connected, you want to make sure that they aren't dangling, they're tied up nicely on the bulkhead, but all the other wiring is in a loom and nice and tidy and won't rattle loose. This is the connector for the motor, and I left it a little pigtail so the in-between length can be ran through the boat and then to the distribution unit. You don't have to remove this side cover plate, that can stay on. And then here are your motor mounts. So the motor mounts have adjustability in and outboard, and then slight adjustability for forward and aft. This cover plate stays closed. This has all the phase cables in it that are all sealed up. Down here are the encoder cables, and those are all sealed up as well. And next we have the coolant areas. So this motor is liquid cooled. This is the cooling plate, and then you can see an open 1/2 inch and an open 3/4. So the open 3/4 will go to the coolant, and the open 1/2 will go to the coolant. It doesn't matter which one, but according to the cooling unit, coolant out will be 1/2 inch, coolant in will be 3/4. So I'll show you the inside of the cooling unit, and then we'll start this thing up and you can see the start sequence. Cooling unit cover comes off with 3 Allens. Here's our heat exchanger, which is around a 3-year lifespan. And then we have the cooling pumps for salt water and coolant. This coolant reservoir can be viewed through this slot, so you can fill this up. And we have a bleed function, so when you connect everything, you can turn the pumps on so you can bleed all the air out. You'll want to keep this as high as possible, so preferably above the motor, and that helps bleeding of the coolant to get all the air out. But this is your connector to get to the distribution unit. And then lastly, before we start it up, you'll want to remove this plug that's in the gearbox, and that's a vent. So I will show you the start sequence. Okay, here's the start sequence. I'm going to turn on 12 volt switch, which will give our display power. The display turns on, and as that's loading, the motor could be functional. The motor can be functional by turning on the key and listen for the contactor. So that contactor closing means you can put the motor in forward immediately. The display doesn't have to be powered on completely to run. So now we'll put it in forward. That was actually reversed, but here's forward now. Got your full 1930 RPM. Back to neutral. So inside this display, we have motor data and then your fault list. If you had any faults, you could see the fault description, cause, and recommended action. Then down here you have your settings. Settings is a passcode protected. It's from 1000 to get in. And then we have different settings you can adjust. You don't want to change motor direction while the motor is in gear, and you don't need to change the RPM. The clock you can turn on or off, 24-hour or 12-hour, and adjust it. Alarms, you can change the volume and the buzzer. And then mainly the alarm is for under voltage or over voltage. So the next one is discharge limit, then voltage cutback, and that's for regen, and the state of charge estimator. Battery capacity, and we have a beta version of this runtime calculator. Batteries will have their own display, and then we have regen is this button, and this goes up to 11. This is different settings for regen. So as you're sailing faster, you can turn it up. I'm generally finding around 3 or 4 is the good setting. And then we also have a night mode. These are the CAN interconnecting cables for the batteries. So here we have that connects to the pin on the battery. And then it's a daisy chain. So each one of these can be connected to each other. And then at the end, there's a pigtail with a resistor in it. This is the cable that connects to the distribution unit and that far plug. And then we'll connect to the empty side of the CAN bus. So all these come in one pack. And I've labeled these connectors with zip ties to keep them all tidy. So they will all come in a box. Again, you don't need to keep this plugged up. This is your programming dongle, so you can keep it safe and protected in a locker. And the rest of the stuff is ready to go.